Forget everything you think you know about ceasefires in Lebanon. What was announced to the world as a diplomatic breakthrough, a moment of relief carefully orchestrated by backroom negotiations and American pressure, collapsed before the ink was dry. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Within minutes of that announcement reaching the airwaves, the border was burning again. And I need you to understand something that the State Department will not say at any press conference, that the editorial writers at the major newspapers will not acknowledge, and that the analysts on cable television are completely unequipped to explain. This was not a failure. This was a demonstration. Having spent years inside military intelligence environments where the gap between public narrative and operational reality defines everything, I can tell you with complete confidence that what happened on that Lebanon border in the minutes following the ceasefire announcement tells you more about the trajectory of this conflict than anything that has been said in any diplomatic forum for the past 18 months. Let me walk you through exactly what happened and why it matters more than anything else you will read or watch today. The ceasefire announcement came through official channels at a time when both sides had ostensibly agreed to a temporary halt in hostilities. The language was careful, calibrated, designed to give political cover to all parties while actually committing no one to anything enforceable. That is the nature of these arrangements. I have watched this pattern play out for decades. The announcement creates a diplomatic moment, a photograph opportunity, a news cycle that allows governments to claim progress without having to demonstrate it in any measurable way. The problem is that the forces on the ground operate on entirely different calculations than the diplomats in hotel conference rooms. What erupted on the Lebanon border in those first minutes was not a breakdown in communication. Stay with me because what I'm about to tell you fundamentally changes how you understand what is happening in this theater. The Radwan Force, which is Hezbollah's elite conventional military unit trained and equipped specifically for cross-border offensive operations, had not stood down. Let me be precise about what the Radwan Force represents, because precision matters here. This is not a militia. This is not an irregular formation. The Radwan Force consists of approximately 8,000 to 10,000 fighters organized along conventional military lines with dedicated logistics trains, established command hierarchies, and equipment packages that include man-portable air defense systems, anti-tank guided missiles of the Cornet variant with tandem warheads capable of defeating composite armor, and mortars ranging from 60 millimeter to 120 millimeter in caliber. These fighters have trained in Iran, they have combat experience from Syria, and they operate in a tunnel network beneath southern Lebanon that represents one of the most sophisticated underground military infrastructures ever constructed by a non-state actor. When the ceasefire was announced, the Radwan force was in position. And when I say in position, I mean forward deployed, weapons cached at fighting positions, observation posts active, communication networks live. The decision to resume fire within minutes of the announcement was not a communications failure between Hezbollah's political leadership and its military commanders. That framing, which you will hear repeated across mainstream outlets, is completely wrong. It was a deliberate signal. It was a demonstration of something that the IDF High Command understands and fears in a way that no public statement from Tel Aviv will ever acknowledge. The signal was this: we are not bound by what your diplomats arrange, and your military cannot stop us from demonstrating that fact whenever we choose. Before we go any further, I need you to understand the geography of what we are discussing, because without that understanding, the tactical reality is invisible. The Blue Line, which is the boundary between Lebanon and Israel, established after the 2000 Israeli withdrawal, runs through terrain that militarily favors the defender in ways that are not immediately obvious from maps. The Litani River, which runs roughly parallel to the border approximately 25 to 30 kilometers to the north, has served as a nominal boundary for Hezbollah's heavy rocket forces under UN Security Council Resolution 1701. But here is what that resolution never addressed and what remains the central military problem for Israeli planners. The terrain between the Blue Line and the Litani is dominated by a series of ridge lines running roughly east-west, with the highest elevations on the Lebanese side, providing observation over Israeli communities and military positions in the Galilee region below. Metula, Kiryat Shmona, the entire Upper Galilee corridor, sits in a geographic basin that is observable and in many cases directly engageable from Lebanese high ground. The IDF's Northern Command has spent years attempting to address this fundamental geographic disadvantage. The Iron Dome batteries positioned in the north can engage rocket threats but cannot do so with unlimited capacity, and they provide zero protection against direct fire weapons and anti-tank missiles engaging at close range. The discovery of cross-border tunnels in 2018, the operation designated Northern Shield, revealed that Hezbollah had invested years and enormous resources in building passage infrastructure beneath the border itself. 6 tunnels were identified and destroyed during that operation, but military planners on the Israeli side who were honest about their assessments, and I have spoken with people who have been in those conversations, acknowledged that finding 6 tunnels did not mean finding all tunnels. What happened in the minutes after the ceasefire announcement was anti-tank fire. Cornet missiles, fired from prepared positions on the Lebanese side of the border, engaging Israeli armor and vehicle positions. The Cornet 9 M133 is a laser beam riding anti-tank missile with a range of 5 to 5.5 kilometers in its standard variant and up to 8 kilometers in the extended range version. The tandem-shaped charge warhead generates behind-armor effects capable of defeating any main battle tank in the Israeli inventory at combat ranges. These were not warning shots. These were aimed engagements at identified targets. What I have not yet explained is why the timing, specifically the minutes immediately following the ceasefire announcement, was operationally significant rather than coincidental. In my time as a military intelligence officer, one of the first things you learn about adversary signaling is that timing is never accidental at the operational level. When a force with Hezbollah's command and control sophistication, and make no mistake, their C2 is sophisticated, chooses to act in a specific window, that window was chosen deliberately. The message being sent to the IDF Northern Command was layered. At the tactical level, it demonstrated that Hezbollah's forward units remained combat ready and combat effective despite weeks of Israeli strikes and operations in southern Lebanon. At the operational level, it demonstrated that political announcements originating from diplomatic channels have no binding effect on Hezbollah's military wing, which answers to its own command structure and its own strategic calculus. At the strategic level, and this is the part that should alarm every Western government analyst watching this, it demonstrated that Hezbollah is willing to bear the international political cost of visibly breaking a ceasefire because it is calculated that the operational benefit of demonstrating invulnerability exceeds that cost. That calculation tells you everything about where this conflict is heading. The IDF response was predictable in its form and insufficient in its effect. Artillery fires from the Israeli side, airstrikes on identified launch points, and a public statement from the IDF spokesperson attributing the ceasefire collapse to Hezbollah violations. All of this is accurate as far as it goes, but it does not go very far. The strikes on launch points after the fact do not address the fundamental problem, which is that Hezbollah has prepared multiple launch positions for every engagement, that their fighters disperse and relocate immediately after firing, and that the target that the IDF is striking when it responds to an anti-tank attack is an empty firing position. The system is designed to absorb Israeli response fires while preserving the actual human and equipment assets responsible for the attack. Keep watching, because the next part is where the strategic picture becomes genuinely alarming in ways that extend far beyond this specific incident. The Lebanese Armed Forces, the LAF, which is supposed to serve as the enforcement mechanism for UN Resolution 1701 in southern Lebanon, was not in a position to prevent what happened. I want to be precise about the LAF's situation because it is frequently misrepresented. The Lebanese army is not a proxy for Hezbollah. It is not coordinating with Hezbollah in any direct operational sense, but it is also not capable of confronting Hezbollah militarily, and both institutions understand this. The LAF has approximately 80,000 personnel on paper, but its equipment is aging, its logistics are constrained by Lebanon's economic collapse, and its officer corps is fragmented along sectarian and political lines that make unified command impossible in practice. When Hezbollah's Radwan force is deployed to fighting positions in southern Lebanon, the LAF does not have the capability to remove them or even to meaningfully constrain their operations. This matters for the international framework because the entire diplomatic architecture surrounding Lebanon's southern border assumes that the LAF can function as a meaningful buffer force. That assumption is wrong. It was wrong in 2006 when Resolution 1701 was written, and it is wrong today. The United Nations interim force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, with approximately 10,000 troops from various contributing nations, has a mandate that explicitly does not authorize offensive military action to disarm Hezbollah or to prevent Hezbollah from taking fighting positions. UNIFIL can observe, report, and protest. It cannot fight. What this means practically is that the international community has constructed an elaborate diplomatic and peacekeeping architecture in southern Lebanon that has no enforcement capacity against the one actor whose behavior it was designed to constrain. Hezbollah has spent the years since 2006 understanding this reality and building its military position accordingly. Now let me tell you what this really means for the trajectory of the conflict. Every ceasefire attempt in this theater that does not address the fundamental military reality I have described will produce the same outcome: an announcement, a brief pause, a resumption of hostilities, and a cycle of international condemnation that changes nothing on the ground. The reason is that Hezbollah's strategic position does not require a ceasefire to survive. Its tunnel infrastructure, its dispersed logistics, its missile and rocket stockpiles distributed across thousands of prepared positions throughout southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley, and its trained manpower give it the ability to sustain operations against Israel for an extended period regardless of diplomatic arrangements made by its political leadership. The IDF understands this at the institutional level, even when public statements suggest otherwise. The 2006 war established that 34 days of intensive air operations and a ground offensive could not achieve Hezbollah's military defeat. Since 2006, Hezbollah has spent 18 years building a more capable, more dispersed, more hardened military force. The tunnel networks are deeper. The missile inventory is larger and includes precision-guided munitions that did not exist in the 2006 arsenal. The Radwan force is trained and equipped at a level that approaches conventional military standards. The anti-drone systems, including jamming equipment and dedicated anti-drone units, have been developed specifically to counter Israeli UAV surveillance that proved decisive in 2006. I have been in enough military environments to know that when a force spends 18 years preparing for a rematch, it does not do so while planning to lose. The ceasefire that failed within minutes was not really about diplomacy. It was about a test. Both sides wanted to know where the other side stood after the latest round of operations. The IDF wanted to know whether Hezbollah had been sufficiently degraded to accept constraints it would not have accepted 6 months ago. Hezbollah's answer, delivered within minutes of the announcement, was unambiguous. They have not been degraded to that threshold. They remain capable and willing to demonstrate that capability at a moment of their choosing. What happens in the coming days will determine whether this remains a grinding attritional conflict along the border or whether we are entering a phase of genuine escalation that neither side has the political will to prevent. The clock is running and the window is genuinely closing on diplomatic options that could reshape the trajectory. I take no pleasure in saying this, but anyone who tells you that another ceasefire announcement without fundamental changes in the underlying military equation will produce a different outcome, is either ignorant of what I have just explained to you or deliberately misleading you. Watch the northern border. Watch what the Radwan force does in the next 72 hours. That will tell you more about where this is heading than anything you will hear from any government spokesperson on any side of this conflict.